Welcome everyone. Today we are unpacking chapter 12 and we are going to focus heavily on Bhagvatism, Shaivism and Brahmanism. If you've been following along with our material, you know this is all about understanding the incredibly rich, dynamic evolution of ancient Indian religious traditions. So let's jump right in.
So think about ancient India for a second. You might be wondering, was it just one single, unchanging belief system for thousands of years? Actually, no. Alongside those very early Vedic practices, many other totally distinct religious traditions evolved to deeply influence Indian culture. It wasn't just a straight line, it was a flourishing, constantly evolving ecosystem of beliefs and practices. Which brings us right to the heart of this explainer. What exactly were Bhagvatism, Shaivism, and Brahmanism? What did their key features actually look like on the ground? And how did they ultimately impact ancient society? These are the exact mysteries we're going to unlock today by looking at the historical evidence.
To find those answers, our analysis today is going to follow this roadmap. First up, the evolution of Indian religion. Second, we'll cover Vedic and epic religion. Third, we're looking at Bhagavatism and personal devotion. Fourth, major religious sects. And finally, unity in diversity.
Okay, starting off with section 1, the evolution of Indian religion.
The very first thing we need to get straight is that Indian religion was absolutely not static. It continuously changed and evolved over time, actively shaping the culture as it grew. It's totally crucial to understand that religious thought in ancient India was constantly expanding and transforming. It reacted to the people, the geography, and the changing times, which eventually led to various new and completely distinct traditions, rather than just staying frozen in place.
Moving right along to section 2, let's look at Vedic and epic religion.
This chronological jump is absolutely fascinating. We start out with the early Vedic period, which was heavily focused on nature worship. But then, moving forward into the epic period, we see this massive expansion of religious thought and philosophy. Finally, we reach the later periods where distinct traditions like the Puranic, Vaishnava, Shaiva, and Shakta movements really cement themselves. This gives you a perfect mental map of how these ideas grew and completely transformed over centuries.
Let's zoom in on that earliest era for a minute. The absolute primary source of information we have for early Vedic religion is the Vedas. During that specific time, the main focus was entirely on revering various powerful forces of nature. Think about the sun, the wind, the fire. These were the elemental forces that early society deeply respected, depended on for survival, and ultimately worshipped.
All right, section 3, Bhagavatism and personal devotion.
Now, what was the connection between Bhagavatism, Vaishnavism, and Shaivism? And why did devotion to specific figures like Vishnu and Shiva suddenly become so central to the culture? This represents a major turning point, moving away from the broad nature worship of the early Vedas to something much more intimate.
The answer boils down to one monumental shift: personal devotion. This is the core philosophy of Bhagavatism, and it marked a massive, fundamental shift in everyday religious practice. Instead of just performing complex, large-scale rituals to elemental natural forces, Bhagavatism placed absolute importance on deep, personal reverence, love, and devotion to a specific personal god. It essentially made the religious experience a one-on-one relationship, which was a total game changer.
Let's see how this played out in section 4, major religious sects.
So that intense personal devotion naturally branched out into distinct paths. If you look at Vaishnavism, you'll see the primary deity is Lord Vishnu, and the focus is heavily on worshipping his various forms and avatars. Then in Shaivism, the central figure is Lord Shiva, which is characterized by very diverse branches and traditions of practice. And in Shaktism, the devotion is directed toward Shakti or Devi, focusing entirely on the immense power of the divine feminine. Each of these offers a highly unique path, but they all share that exact same core idea of personal devotion that we were just talking about.
Which brings us to our final section, section 5, unity in diversity.
I want you to imagine a family for a second. You might have members of this family who choose to worship Vishnu, others who worship Shiva, and maybe others who worship Shakti. They do it differently. They have different specific rituals and practices, right? Yet all of them absolutely share a unified spiritual goal of devotion and faith. This family analogy is a perfect way to illustrate how different worship methods and distinct sects still ultimately share the exact same unified, overarching spiritual framework.
This quote really hits the nail on the head. Diversity is literally one of the greatest characteristics of the entire Indian religious tradition.
It is exactly this incredible, vibrant diversity of sects and traditions that gives Indian religious culture its unique strength, its resilience, and its profound character. It didn't force a single, rigid way of thinking. Instead, it embraced a multitude of paths that all point towards spiritual growth.
Okay, real quick, for those of you using this explainer to prep for your exams, pay close attention to this checklist. You absolutely need to confidently know the features of early Vedic religion, the specific defining characteristics of Bhagvatism, and the specific details of Vaishnavism, Shaivism, and Shaktism. If you can clearly explain the flow from early nature worship to personal devotion within these specific sects, you are going to be perfectly prepared for both short and long-form questions.
So, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a question to think about. Which of these ancient traditions do you find most fascinating to study today? Are you drawn more to the elemental power of the early Vedas, or maybe the intimate devotion of Bhagavatism? Definitely think about that as you review your notes. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more chapter-wise historical analyses where we try to make complex history clear, structured, and fun. See you next time.